Homeless boy carried an injured girl. Miles, he had no idea she was a biker's daughter. Miles of Mercy, revised final version part 1. The carrying. The speedometer held steady at 62, not fast enough to draw attention, not slow enough to make the trip longer than it needed to be. Bryn Ashford kept her eyes on the yellow line disappearing under the hood hands at 10 and 2, the way her father had taught her when she was 15, and learning to drive with one working ear and a stubbornness that didn't quit. Highway 26 stretched out black and empty, ahead swallowed by Douglas firs, pressing close on both sides like they were trying to reclaim what asphalt had taken. No streetlights, no gas stations for the next 40 miles. Just road and darkness and the occasional reflection of eyes watching from the tree line. Deer, probably. Maybe raccoons. Things that knew better than to step into the path of something bigger and faster. The clock on the dash read 11:15. She'd left Portland 3 hours ago, later than she'd planned, but the study group had run long and she'd wanted to finish the chapter on constitutional law before heading home. Saxon wouldn't be awake when she got back. He'd be in the garage with the crew engines torn apart on workbenches, heavy metal bleeding through the walls, men who'd learned to fix broken things because the world had broken them first and taught them not to wait for someone else to care. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. She glanced down. Text from Saxon. 3 words, no punctuation, the way he always texted. Drive safe, kid. She smiled. Typed back with one hand, eyes flicking between screen and road. Always do. The phone buzzed again before she could set it down. Another text. People will underestimate you. She knew the rest without reading it. He'd told her the same thing every time she left the house since she was 12 years old. Since the day she came home from school crying because a teacher had spoken to her like she was stupid, like being deaf meant being less. Saxon had sat her down at the kitchen table, hands rough and scarred from years of working metal and engines, and he'd looked at her the way he looked at broken carburetors that just needed the right adjustment to run clean again. People will underestimate you, he'd said, signing as he spoke so she could read both his lips and his hands. Prove them wrong by showing up. Not by arguing, not by explaining, just by showing up and doing the work until the work spoke for itself. She set the phone back in the cup holder, refocused on the road. 53 miles to home. Another hour if the road stayed clear. The curve came out of nowhere. Not sharp, not dangerous if you were paying attention. Just a gentle sweep to the right, the kind of turn that happened 1,000 times on Highway 26 between Portland and the coast. The kind of turn you took without thinking if your eyes were on the road and your hands were on the wheel and your mind wasn't replaying a conversation from 3 hours ago about due process and the 14th Amendment. The phone buzzed again. Bryn glanced down. Reflex. Stupid. A half-second of distraction that pulled her eyes from the road just long enough for the wheel to drift 6 inches to the left. The tires caught gravel at the edge of the shoulder. The car jerked. Bryn overcorrected, yanking the wheel hard to the right, and suddenly the Honda was sliding tires, screaming, the world tilting as momentum dragged her across both lanes toward the guardrail that was supposed to keep cars from dropping into the ditch, but looked too flimsy to stop anything moving this fast. She hit the brakes. Wrong move. The car spun once, a full rotation that blurred trees and asphalt and sky into a single smear of motion, and then the guardrail was there, metal shrieking as the bumper caught and twisted and ripped open like foil. The car didn't stop. It punched through nose first and dropped. The impact when it hit bottom wasn't loud. It was final, a deep crunch of metal folding inward, glass exploding outward, the airbag deploying too late to do anything but slam into her chest and leave her gasping. The engine hissed. Steam rose. The headlights flickered once and died, leaving only the darkness and the smell of gasoline, sharp enough to cut through the taste of blood in her mouth. Bryn sat very still. Breathing hurt. Moving hurt. Thinking hurt. Her hands were still on the wheel knuckles, white fingers locked in place like her body hadn't caught up to the fact that the car had stopped moving. She tried to open the door. It didn't budge. The frame had bent inward, trapping her inside a cage of crumpled steel and shattered safety glass. Panic flared hot and immediate. She shoved against the door with her shoulder once, twice, 3 times, each impact sending fresh waves of pain radiating down her left side. The 4th shove cracked something loose. The door groaned open just wide enough for her to squeeze through, dragging herself out into the cold night air and collapsing onto dirt and gravel and broken glass that bit into her palms. She tried to stand. Her left leg gave out immediately, buckling beneath her weight, and she went down hard, gasping, as white-hot pain exploded from her knee to her hip. Something was wrong, very wrong. The kind of wrong that didn't get better with walking it off or icing it down or waiting for morning. She pulled herself forward on her elbows, inch by inch, dragging her useless leg behind her until she reached the edge of the road. Asphalt solid and flat, the yellow line running down the center, like a promise that civilization still existed somewhere beyond this stretch of empty highway. Headlights appeared in the distance, high beams cutting through the dark, growing brighter, closer, fast. Bryn lifted her right hand, waved, tried to shout, but her voice came out thin and reedy, swallowed by the sound of the engine roaring past without slowing. Wind from the trucks passing nearly knocked her flat. She watched the taillights disappear around the curve. Red dots fading into nothing. Another car, this one slower. A sedan. Bryn waved both arms this time, ignoring the way her ribs screamed in protest. The sedan swerved slightly to give her space, headlights illuminating her for half a second, long enough for the driver to see her lying on the shoulder, covered in blood and broken glass. And then it was gone too. She lowered her arms, stared at the empty road. The pain in her leg had shifted from sharp to deep, a throbbing ache that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Blood ran down the side of her face from a cut somewhere above her eyebrow, warm and wet and impossible to ignore. A third car approached. Bryn didn't wave this time. She just watched it pass, then a fourth, then a fifth. None of them stopped. She thought about her phone, still in the cup holder, still in the car. She looked back at the wreck half buried in the ditch and knew she didn't have the strength to crawl back down and retrieve it. Even if she did, there was no signal out here. She'd checked when she left Portland. 2 bars at the city limits, 1 bar by Beaverton, nothing but empty air after that. The cold was settling in now. Not the sharp bite of winter, just the low, creeping chill of an Oregon night in late October, the kind that soaked through clothes and skin and bone if you stayed still long enough. Bryn wrapped her arms around herself and tried to stay calm, tried to think, tried to remember what Saxon had taught her about survival. Stay visible, stay warm, stay awake. She was failing at all 3. Another set of headlights. Bryn didn't bother looking up. She heard the car approach, heard the engine note change as it passed, heard the sound fade into the distance. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges, darkness creeping in from the periphery, like her body had decided it was done fighting and ready to let go. She closed her eyes, just for a second, just to rest. When she opened them again, someone was standing over her. Not someone, a boy. Thin, maybe her age, wearing a jacket too light for the weather and jeans torn at the knees. He knelt beside her, face half shadowed in the darkness, eyes wide and uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he should be there or if he'd already made a mistake by stopping. Bryn tried to sign. Her hands wouldn't cooperate. She tried to speak instead, forcing words past the blood and fear clogging her throat. "Help!" The word came out barely audible, more breath than sound. The boy leaned closer. "I'm here," he said. His voice was quiet, steady, not calm but controlled, like he was holding something back. "I'm not leaving." Bryn's vision swam. She focused on his face, trying to read his lips, trying to understand. The pain in her leg was getting worse, spreading upward through her hip and into her spine, and she knew with sudden clarity that if she stayed here much longer, she wouldn't be getting up at all. "Phone," she whispered, "in the car." The boy looked past her toward the wreck. He stood, walked to the edge of the embankment, stared down into the ditch for a long moment, then came back and shook his head. "No signal anyway," he said. "I checked." Bryn's chest tightened. "Then what?" "I'm going to carry you." She stared at him. The boy was skinny, all angles and edges, the kind of frame that looked like it had been stretched too thin and never filled back out. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, from something else. Fear, maybe, or exhaustion, or the knowledge that what he was about to do was impossible and he was going to try anyway. "You can't," Bryn said. The words hurt to form. "You'll hurt yourself." The boy knelt again, sliding one arm behind her shoulders, the other under her knees. His hands were freezing. She could feel them through her jeans, through the thin fabric of her shirt, cold enough to make her shiver. "Gas station's 5 miles that way," he said, nodding toward the direction he had been walking. "Maybe less. I can make it." "You don't even know me." He looked at her, then really looked, and something in his expression made her chest ache worse than the impact of the airbag ever had. "You're going to die if I don't," he said simply. He lifted. The pain was immediate and absolute. Bryn's broken legs shifted bone, grinding against bone, and she screamed before she could stop herself. The boy froze, arms locked, breath coming fast and shallow. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry, I realize that hurts. I'm sorry." He adjusted his grip, trying to find a position that didn't make her want to pass out, and then he started walking. The first mile was the worst. Not because of the pain, though the pain was there, constant and relentless. A white-hot spike driven through her femur every time the boy's steps jarred her injured leg. The worst part was feeling his body start to break down beneath her weight. Bryn wasn't heavy. 5'6", 130 pounds on a good day less now that she'd been living on coffee and stress during midterms. But dead weight was different. Dead weight fought you. Dead weight turned 130 pounds into 200, 300, 1,000 pounds of gravity pulling down with every step. She felt the boy's arms start to shake. Subtle at first, just a faint tremor in his biceps where her shoulder pressed against him, but growing stronger with each passing minute. His breathing changed too shallow and rapid, the kind of breathing that meant his body was running on adrenaline and nothing else. "Put me down," Bryn whispered. The boy didn't respond. He just kept walking, eyes fixed on the road ahead, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. A car approached from behind, headlights painting them in harsh white light. The boy stepped to the side of the road, turned to face the oncoming vehicle and raised one hand. The car slowed. Bryn's heart leaped. Someone was stopping. Someone was going to help. The car swerved around them and accelerated, taillights disappearing into the darkness. The boy lowered his hand, didn't say anything, just adjusted his grip and kept walking. The second mile was when Bryn realized he wasn't going to quit. His arms were shaking violently now, muscles spasming with the effort of keeping her aloft. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cold, and she could feel his heart hammering against her side, too fast, too hard, the rhythm of someone pushing their body past every reasonable limit. He stumbled once, foot catching on loose gravel, and for a terrible moment Bryn thought they were both going down. The boy dropped to one knee, gasping, arms still locked around her like letting go would be worse than falling. Agony tore through her broken leg, and she bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood. "I'm sorry," the boy said again. His voice was ragged now, stripped of everything except raw determination. "I slipped. I didn't mean to." He forced himself back up. One leg, then the other. Bryn felt him sway, felt the way his entire body was trembling with the effort of standing, and she made a decision. "What's your name?" The boy didn't answer. He just started walking again, slower now, each step deliberate and measured like he was counting them in his head. Bryn tried again. "Please, tell me your name." Still nothing. She shifted slightly in his arms, turning her head so she could see his face. His expression was blank eyes, unfocused, like he'd retreated somewhere deep inside himself where pain and exhaustion couldn't reach him. "You carry me like my dad would," Bryn said softly. That got through. The boy's eyes flickered just for a second, and his grip tightened. "Your dad sounds like a good man," he said. His voice broke on the last word. Bryn felt it in her chest, a sharp twist of something she couldn't name. This boy, this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere and decided her life was worth destroying himself for, was crying. Not sobbing, not making a sound, just tears running down his face in silent tracks that he didn't bother to wipe away. "He yells a lot," Bryn said, trying to keep him talking, trying to keep him present. "But he always comes back." The boy nodded once. "That's good. Coming back is good." Another car passed, then another. Neither slowed. The third mile was when Bryn started keeping track of his breathing. In, out, in, out. Too fast, too shallow. The kind of breathing that meant his body was shutting down, prioritizing oxygen to his brain and heart, and nothing else. His arms had gone past shaking and into something worse, and a deep bone-level tremor that she could feel radiating through his entire frame. She thought about telling him to stop, thought about insisting about making it an order, about anything that would get him to put her down before he collapsed. But she didn't, because somewhere in the back of her mind, beneath the pain and fear and growing certainty that they were both going to die out here on this empty stretch of highway, she understood something. He needed this, not for her. For himself, for whatever reason, had put him out here walking alone in the middle of the night with no car and no phone and nothing but the clothes on his back. He needed to prove that he could do this one thing, this one impossible thing, and if she took that away from him by begging him to quit, she'd be killing something in him that was already barely alive. So she stayed quiet. She focused on the rhythm of his steps, the sound of his breathing, the way his heart was still beating against her ribs, even though it should have given out by now. And she made him a promise. I will find you. Not out loud, just in her head, silent and absolute. When this was over, when they reached the gas station and the ambulance came and the paramedics took her away, she would find him. She would learn his name. She would make sure he knew that what he did tonight mattered, that he mattered, that somewhere in this world there was a girl who owed him everything and wouldn't forget. The fourth mile was when he fell, not stumbled, fell. His legs gave out completely, knees buckling, and they both went down hard. Bryn hit the asphalt first, her broken leg twisting beneath her, and the scream that tore out of her throat was primal and raw and didn't sound like anything human. The boy landed half on top of her arms, still wrapped around her shoulders, like even in falling he was trying to protect her from the impact. He was sobbing now, full body shaking sobs that he couldn't control or hide. I can't. I'm sorry, he choked out. He pushed himself up. Bryn watched in horror as he forced his legs to straighten, watched him lock his knees and plant his feet and bend down to lift her again. His arms didn't want to work anymore. She could see it in the way they moved, jerky and uncoordinated muscles firing in random patterns, like the signals from his brain were getting scrambled somewhere along the way. But he lifted her anyway. Bryn grabbed his jacket with one hand, fingers digging into the worn fabric. Stop, she said. Not a request, an order. You're going to kill yourself. The boy looked down at her. His face was gray in the darkness, eyes sunken, lips cracked and bleeding. He looked like death. He looked like he'd already died somewhere back on mile 2 and his body just hadn't figured it out yet. I understand that, he said, and he kept walking. The fifth mile was when Bryn saw the lights. Faint at first, just a yellow glow on the horizon that could have been headlights or streetlights or her oxygen-starved brain playing tricks on her. But the glow got brighter as they got closer, resolving into distinct points of light, fluorescent and steady and real. A gas station, 24 hours judging by the brightness, 2 pumps, a small convenience store squatting behind them. The most beautiful thing Bryn had ever seen. The boy saw them too. She felt the change in his body, the sudden surge of adrenaline, giving him one last push, one final sprint. He ran. Not fast, not graceful, more of a lurching stumble that threatened to send them both crashing to the pavement with every step. But he ran. They reached the edge of the parking lot, and the boy's legs finally mercifully gave out for good. He dropped to his knees, lowering Bryn onto the concrete as gently as he could manage, with arms that had stopped responding to conscious thought. She heard him gasping, heard the wet rattle in his chest that meant his lungs were close to collapsing. Help! The word came out barely, louder than a whisper. He tried again, louder this time, voice cracking. Help, please. A man near the pumps turned. His eyes went wide. He dropped the gas nozzle and ran toward them, shouting something Bryn couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. More people appeared. A woman. Another man. Someone was on a phone, voice urgent, giving an address. Someone else was kneeling beside Bryn, hands gentle, asking questions she couldn't process. Through it all, Bryn kept her eyes on the boy. He was still kneeling beside her, arms hanging useless at his sides, chest heaving with the effort of breathing. Blood ran from his nose in a thin stream. His hands were swollen fingers bent at wrong angles. He looked like he'd been through a war and lost. Bryn reached out. Her hand shook, but she forced it to move, forced her fingers to close around his wrist. His skin was ice cold. Your name, she said, one last time. Please. The boy looked at her. For a moment she thought he was going to answer. His lips moved, forming the shape of a word she couldn't quite read. Then he pulled away. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Red and blue lights painted the gas station in flashing colors. Paramedics rushed toward them with a stretcher and medical bags and professional efficiency that meant Bryn was about to be taken care of by people who knew what they were doing. She tried to hold onto the boy's wrist, but her grip was too weak. He stood swaying and took a step back. Then another. Don't leave, Bryn said. Her vision was tunneling and a darkness creeping in from all sides. I need to know who you are. The boy shook his head. You're safe now. But that's all that matters. He turned and walked toward the darkness beyond the gas station's lights. Bryn tried to call out, tried to tell him to wait, to stay, to let someone help him the way he'd helped her. But the paramedics were lifting her onto the stretcher, strapping her down, asking her questions in voices that demanded answers. The boy, she managed. Where did he go? One of the paramedics followed her gaze toward the edge of the parking lot. What boy? Bryn's heart lurched. She craned her neck, searching the shadows, but he was already gone. Vanished into the night like he'd never been there at all. Like she'd imagined the whole thing. Like the past 90 minutes had been a fever dream brought on by blood loss and trauma. But her arms knew better. Her body knew better. She could still feel the ghost of his heartbeat against her ribs, could still hear the sound of his breathing in her ear, could still remember the exact weight of his determination as he carried her mile after impossible mile. The ambulance doors closed. The engine started. Someone was pressing an oxygen mask to her face, and Bryn was too tired to fight it. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, holding on to one thought, one promise, one absolute certainty that she repeated like a prayer as consciousness slipped away. I will find you. The ambulance pulled onto Highway 26, heading back toward Portland, sirens cutting through the night. Behind it, the gas station returned to its normal rhythm, pumps humming, fluorescent lights buzzing. The convenience store clerk wiping down counters and pretending the last 20 minutes hadn't happened. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the lights, a boy with destroyed arms and a collapsing body stumbled forward one step at a time, heading east toward nothing, running from everything, carrying the weight of one good choice like it was the only thing keeping him alive. He didn't know that the girl he'd saved was the daughter of a man who built his entire life on the principle that people who help don't disappear. He didn't know that she was already making plans, already forming strategies, already preparing to burn down every wall between them if that's what it took to find him again. He only knew that his body was done, that the pain had gone past screaming and into a numb static that meant permanent damage if he didn't get help soon. That every step was harder than the last. But he kept walking anyway, because walking meant moving, and moving meant surviving, and surviving meant he got to wake up tomorrow and make the same choice all over again. To be someone who stops, someone who stays, someone who carries people when everyone else drives past, even if it killed him, especially if it killed him, because dying for something was better than living for nothing. And for 5 miles tonight, carrying a girl who didn't know his name, he'd been someone worth remembering. That would have to be enough. Part 2, the reckoning. The first thing Bryn noticed when she woke was the silence, not true silence, hospital silence. The kind filled with machines beeping in rhythmic patterns, footsteps echoing down linoleum hallways, voices murmuring just beyond the range of understanding. But compared to the screaming chaos of her last conscious moments, the crush of pain and motion and fear, this felt like waking into a tomb. The second thing she noticed was the quantum. Her left leg was suspended in a sling wrapped from hip to ankle in white fiberglass that looked too clean, too sterile, too permanent. She stared at it for a long moment, brain struggling to connect the abstract concept of broken bone with the reality of metal pins and surgical screws holding her femur together. The third thing she noticed was that she was alone. No nurses hovering, no doctors checking charts, just Bryn and the machines and the antiseptic smell of a room designed to keep people alive but not necessarily comfortable. She reached for the call button, fingers clumsy, and pressed it twice. Then she saw the tablet on the bedside table. Hospital-issued screen, already lit keyboard, accessible. Someone had thought ahead. Someone knew she couldn't hear a nurse's response if they called back through the intercom. Bryn grabbed the tablet, hands shaking, and started typing. Where is he? She deleted it, started again. Slower this time. More specific. The boy who carried me. Where is he? I need to know. She pressed send, waited, watched the cursor blink on the empty screen like it was counting down seconds she didn't have to waste. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Middle-aged, kind eyes, the sort of person who'd probably chosen this job because they genuinely cared and hadn't yet been ground down by the system. She glanced at the tablet, read the message, and her expression shifted into something carefully neutral. You're awake, the nurse said, speaking slowly, over-enunciating the way people always did when they found out Bryn was deaf. "How are you feeling?" Bryn typed without looking away from the nurse's face. "Answer my question first." The nurse hesitated. She picked up Bryn's chart, made a show of checking vitals that didn't need checking, buying time to figure out how to say something she didn't want to say. "The young man who brought you in," the nurse said finally, "he didn't stay. He left before the ambulance arrived at the hospital." Bryn's chest tightened. She typed faster now, fingers slamming into the screen. "Did anyone get his name? Phone number? Address? Anything?" The nurse shook her head. "I'm sorry, he was gone before anyone thought to ask." Bryn stared at the screen. The words blurred. She blinked hard, forcing her vision to clear, refusing to let herself cry over something as fixable as missing information. There had to be security cameras. Witnesses. Someone at that gas station had to have seen him, talk to him, notice which direction he went. "What time is it?" The nurse glanced at her watch. 8:35, Saturday morning. "You've been here about 6 hours. They had to do surgery on your leg. Broke the femur in 3 places. You're lucky you didn't sever an artery." Bryn wasn't listening. 6 hours. He could be anywhere by now. Could have caught a bus, hitched a ride, walked back into whatever life he'd been living before he stopped to pick up a dying girl on the side of the highway. She typed again. "I need my phone." "Your father has it. He's been here all night. Just stepped out to make some calls." The nurse moved closer, adjusting the IV drip. "You should rest. You've been through significant trauma." Rest. The word tasted like ash. Bryn shook her head, ignoring the way the motion made her skull throb. "Get my dad, now." The nurse opened her mouth to argue, saw something in Bryn's expression that made her reconsider and nodded. She left the room without another word. Bryn sank back against the pillows, breathing hard. Her entire body hurt. Not the sharp agony of the crash, but a deep bone-level ache that suggested she'd been put back together with parts that didn't quite fit right anymore. The pain didn't matter. What mattered was the boy. What mattered was finding him before he disappeared completely, before the memory of his heartbeat against her ribs faded into something she could convince herself she'd imagined. Footsteps in the hallway. Heavy boots. The kind that had walked through oil and gravel and 1,000 garage floors. Saxon Ashford filled the doorway, 6'3" and 200 pounds of leather and ink and controlled violence. His face was gray with exhaustion, stubble darkening his jaw, eyes bloodshot from a night spent watching machines breathe for his daughter. He saw her awake, and something in his expression cracked. Just for a second, just long enough for Bryn to see the fear he'd been carrying since the hospital called. Then he was moving, crossing the room in 3 strides, pulling a chair up beside her butt and sitting down hard. He didn't touch her, didn't grab her hand or smooth her hair, or do any of the things other fathers might have done. He just sat there close enough that she could read his lips without straining and waited. Bryn picked up the tablet. "Dad, someone saved me." Saxon nodded. "I'm aware. Paramedics told me. Said a kid carried you 5 miles. She typed faster. "I need to find him." Saxon's jaw tightened. "You need to heal." Bryn shook her head hard enough to make the room spin. She typed, deleted, typed again. "He destroyed himself carrying me. I felt his body breaking. And then he disappeared. Dad, I need to find him before someone else does. Before he runs." Saxon studied her face for a long moment. She knew that look. He was reading her the way he read engines, looking for the thing that was out of alignment, the piece that needed adjustment. "Why?" he said finally. "Because I promised him I would." "You didn't promise anything. You passed out." "I promised myself then." Same thing. Saxon leaned back in the chair. It creaked under his weight. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, handed it to Bryn. "Security footage from the gas station," he said. "Posted it on the crew's private channel last night. Thought someone might recognize him." Bryn grabbed the phone, hands trembling. The video was grainy shot from a camera mounted above the pumps, but clear enough. She watched herself being lowered onto the concrete. Watched the boy kneel beside her, face turned away from the camera, shoulders shaking. Watched him stand and walk toward the darkness. The timestamp read 1:52 a.m. She rewound, watched again. This time she focused on details. The way he moved, the way he held himself like someone who'd learned to be invisible. The torn jacket, the jeans with holes at the knees, the boots that had walked more miles than any boots should have to walk. And his hands. Even in the low-resolution footage, she could see them. Swollen, damaged, the hands of someone who just carried 130 pounds for over an hour without stopping. Bryn looked up at Saxon. "Any leads?" she signed. Saxon shook his head. "Not yet, but I've got people looking." She handed the phone back, then picked up the tablet again. "I'm not staying here. You just had surgery. I can heal at home." The doctor said, "I don't care what they said." Saxon sighed. He rubbed a hand across his face, the sound of calluses against stubble loud in the quiet room. "You understand what you're asking," he said. Bryn met his eyes. Yes, silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with the weight of a conversation they'd had a dozen times before in different contexts with different stakes. The conversation about what it meant to owe someone, about debts that couldn't be paid with money or apologies or time. Saxon had been 14 when the foster family decided they were done with him. Too much trouble, they'd said. Too angry. Too broken. They'd driven him out to a rural road 30 miles from Portland and told him to walk home. See if that taught him some respect. He'd crawled 3 miles before a trucker stopped. Bryn had heard the story exactly once late one night when she was 12 and asking why he spent so much time at the garage with men who looked like they'd fight you as soon as talk to you. Saxon had told her voice flat and factual about the road and the pain and the 27 cars that had passed him before someone finally stopped. "I built this crew," he'd said, "on one principle. We stop. Always. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it costs us. Because I remember what it feels like when no one does." Bryn had never forgotten. And now she was asking him to help her find a boy who'd lived that same principle, who'd stopped when it cost him everything, who'd carried her when driving past would have been easier. Saxon stood, walked to the window, stared out at the parking lot below, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "They're going to call child services," he said. Bryn's fingers froze on the tablet screen. "Kid like that," Saxon continued, "homeless, no ID, fled the scene. The system's going to want him in custody. Protective, they'll call it. We both know what it really is." Bryn typed slowly. "Then we find him first." Saxon turned from the window. "And then what?" "We make sure they can't take him." "How?" Bryn didn't have all the answers yet. But she knew the boy had saved her life, and the world was going to try to punish him for it. Lock him in a facility. Process him through a system designed to break people who didn't fit neatly into categories. Make him small enough to manage. "She wouldn't let that happen. I'll figure it out. But I need your help." Saxon looked at her for a long time, then he nodded once. "I'll make some calls," he said. "Get you checked out AMA. But you rest until then. We're not going anywhere if you can't walk." Bryn wanted to argue, wanted to rip out the IV and hobble to the door on her casted leg if that's what it took. But she knew Saxon was right. So she nodded and sank back against the pillows, already planning, already strategizing, already preparing for a fight she didn't know how to win, but refused to lose. Saxon headed for the door, stopped, turned back. "This kid," he said, "he mattered to you." Bryn didn't hesitate. "He carried me when no one else would. That makes him family." 17 miles east of Portland, beneath the I-84 bridge where Highway 26 merged into the interstate, Jonah Reed sat with his back against concrete and tried not to die. The sun had come up 2 hours ago. He'd watched it rise from behind the mountains, pale light spreading across the Columbia River, like someone had spilled paint on glass. Beautiful. Indifferent. The kind of beauty that didn't care if you were there to see it or not. His arms didn't work anymore. That was the main problem. He could move them, sort of could lift them a few inches if he focused every scrap of willpower he had left. But actually using them, gripping things bearing weight, all of that was gone. The muscles had torn somewhere around mile 4. He'd felt it happen, felt the fibers snap one by one like strings breaking on an instrument played too hard. His hands were worse. Swollen to twice their normal size, fingers bent at angles that made his stomach turn when he looked at them. Frostbite maybe? Or just damage from carrying weight they weren't designed to carry. Either way, he couldn't feel his fingertips anymore, couldn't tell if he was touching concrete or air or his own skin. The shaking had started around dawn, deep tremors that rattled his teeth and made his vision swim. Hypothermia. He'd learned about it once back when he'd had a social worker who cared enough to make him sit through a seminar on winter survival. Your body temperature drops. Your brain gets confused. You start making bad decisions. Eventually, you just go to sleep and don't wake up. Jonah had promised himself he wouldn't sleep, but his eyes kept closing anyway. A sound pulled him back to consciousness. Footsteps, boots on gravel. Jonah's heart hammered against his ribs, and he tried to push himself upright, tried to run, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He managed to shift sideways, pressing himself deeper into the shadow of the bridge support. The footsteps stopped a few feet away. Easy, a voice said, male, older, calm, not here to hurt you. Jonah forced his eyes open. The man standing 10 feet away wore leather, Hell's Angel's patch on his back skull, and wings stitched in white thread. He was maybe 40, graying at the temples, arms covered in ink that told stories Jonah couldn't read from this distance. The man held up his hands, showing empty palms. My name's Garrett, he said. I ride with Saxon Ashford. His daughter's the girl you carried last night. Jonah's throat closed. He tried to speak, but nothing came out except a rasping cough that tasted like blood. Garrett took a step closer, stopped when Jonah flinched. She's alive, Garrett said. Surgery went fine. She's going to be okay. Because of you. Jonah shook his head. Words wouldn't come, so he just shook his head over and over, rejecting the idea that what he'd done mattered. People did things all the time that didn't matter. Helped strangers who forgot their names 5 minutes later. Stopped at accidents that someone else would have stopped at anyway. He wasn't special, wasn't a hero. He'd just been too stupid to keep walking. Garrett crouched down, bringing himself to eye level. He set something on the ground between them. A thermos, a folded blanket, a pair of thick winter gloves. Her father wants to thank you, Garrett said. Jonah found his voice. It came out hoarse, broken. I don't want thanks. I'm aware, but you're going to freeze to death under this bridge if someone doesn't help you. I'm fine. Garrett looked at him. Really looked. Took in the gray skin, the shaking, the hands that had swollen into useless clubs. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. No, he said quietly. You're not. Jonah tried to argue, but his body betrayed him. Another tremor ripped through his core, violent enough to crack his skull against the concrete support. He gasped, vision whiting out, and when it cleared, Garrett was closer, not touching, but ready to. Let us help, Garrett said. Why? The word barely made it past Jonah's lips. Garrett picked up the thermos, unscrewed the cap, poured steaming coffee into the lid. The smell alone made Jonah's mouth water. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. Couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him something without expecting payment. Because the girl's asking for you, Garrett said, and Saxon doesn't ignore his daughter when she asks for something. Jonah stared at the coffee. Steam rose in thin curls, disappearing into the cold morning air. She doesn't even know my name, he said. Then tell her. I can't. Why not? Because names made you real. Names made you traceable. Names meant someone could find, you could pull up records, could connect you to the system you'd been running from for 2 years. Names meant going back into a cage. Garrett seemed to understand without Jonah having to explain. He set the coffee down within reach and stood. I'm not going to force you, he said, and neither is Saxon. But that girl's not going to stop looking. You should be aware of that before you decide to disappear. Jonah watched him walk away, watched until the footsteps faded and the road was empty again. Then he reached for the coffee with hands that barely worked, lifted it to his mouth, and drank. The warmth spread through his chest like a small fire, pushing back the cold for just a moment. Not enough to save him, just enough to remind him what being saved felt like. He set the empty cup down and pulled the blanket over his shoulders. The gloves he left on the ground. If he put them on, he might not take them off. Might start believing that help could come without strings attached. He'd believed that once before. It had cost him 3 months in juvenile detention and a criminal record that followed him everywhere. Never again. Jonah closed his eyes and tried not to think about the girl. Tried not to remember the way she'd looked at him in those final seconds before the ambulance doors closed. Like he was someone worth knowing. He failed. At 11 o'clock, Bryn Ashford checked herself out of Portland General Hospital against medical advice on crutches, with her father's jacket draped over her hospital gown because she'd refused to wait for someone to bring her real clothes. The doctor tried to stop her. a young resident with nervous hands and a sincere belief that protocol existed for good reasons. He explained the risks: infection, dislocation, permanent damage if the pin shifted before the bone set properly. Bryn listened to exactly none of it. She typed on her tablet while he talked, pulled up the AMA form and signed it with her finger before he'd finished his second sentence about physical therapy requirements. "I'll be careful," she said, voice flat in the way it always went when she spoke out loud without being able to hear herself. "Now get out of my way." The doctor looked at Saxon. Saxon shrugged. "She's 17, he said, but she's also right. So step aside or we'll make this complicated." They made it to the parking lot without security getting called. Small miracle. Saxon had parked his truck near the emergency entrance, a '98 Ford with rust spots and an engine that ran cleaner than anything half its age because Saxon didn't believe in letting machines die just because they got old. Bryn hauled herself into the passenger seat, crutches clattering into the footwell. Every movement sent fresh pain shooting through her leg, but she gritted her teeth and ignored it. Pain was information. Information could be managed. Saxon climbed in the driver's side, didn't start the engine, just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the hospital entrance, like he was waiting for someone to run out and drag them back inside. Bryn pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked from the accident, but it still worked. She opened Instagram, scrolled to the video Saxon had posted on the crew's private channel, and downloaded it. "What are you doing?" Saxon said. Bryn didn't look up. She was already typing, fingers flying across the screen, composing a post she'd been planning since she woke up. "Help me find him." She attached the video, the grainy footage of a boy carrying her to safety while the world drove past. She tagged it with every Portland area hashtag she could think of. Added a description. "Last night this person saved my life. He carried me 5+ miles after a car accident when no one else stopped. Then he disappeared. If you know who he is, please message me. I need to thank him." She hit post. Saxon read over her shoulder. "You sure about this?" Bryn met his eyes. "Someone out there knows him," she signed. "Someone saw him. This is the fastest way to find out who. It's also the fastest way to get child services involved." Bryn had considered it, and decided she didn't care. If making this public meant the system came after him, fine. She'd deal with that when it happened. Right now, the priority was finding him before he froze to death under a bridge somewhere. Her phone buzzed. Then again. Then continuously notifications flooding in faster than she could read them. 10 shares in the first minute. 105. Comments piling up, mostly strangers saying thoughts and prayers, and how amazing, but a few with actual information. Someone recognized the gas station. Someone else thought they'd seen a kid matching his description walking east on Highway 26 around 3 in the morning. One comment made Bryn's blood run cold. "That's the homeless kid who hangs around the I-84 underpass sometimes. Saw him there last week. Looked rough." She grabbed Saxon's arm. "I-84, she said out loud. "We need to go, now." Saxon started the engine. "You're in no shape." Bryn cut him off by yanking the door open and trying to climb out. He caught her arm before she could fall, pulled her back into the seat, swore quietly in a way that meant he was giving in. "Fine," he said, "but we're bringing the crew, and you're staying in the truck." Bryn nodded. She'd agree to anything if it meant getting closer to finding him before someone else did. Saxon pulled out his phone, made 3 calls in rapid succession. Short conversations, no wasted words, just coordinates and times, and the kind of clipped military efficiency that came from years of riding with men who understood orders. They pulled out of the parking lot at 11:23 a.m. By noon, 6 motorcycles were converging on the I-84 corridor. Grace Holloway read the viral post 3 times before she picked up the phone. She'd been a social worker for 11 years, long enough to recognize a red flag when she saw one. Homeless minor, no identification, fled the scene of an emergency. That combination spelled one thing: a kid in crisis who needed intervention before the crisis became a tragedy. The fact that he'd saved someone's life didn't change the basics. If anything, it made it more urgent. Heroes made good headlines until they collapsed from exposure, or got picked up by the wrong people, or decided the world wasn't worth saving anymore, and did something permanent about it. She dialed the Portland Police Department non-emergency line. "This is Grace Holloway, Multnomah County Child Services. I need to file a welfare concern report for an unidentified minor, possibly homeless. last seen in the Highway 26 corridor. The dispatcher took down the details. Grace added everything she'd pulled from the video and social media posts. Approximate age, physical description, last known direction of travel. "We'll send a unit to check the area," the dispatcher said. "Make it 2 units," Grace replied, "and have them coordinate with me before making contact. This kid's a flight risk." She ended the call and opened her laptop, started typing up the preliminary report. Risk factors: homeless, unaccompanied minor, possible trauma from recent events, demonstrated pattern of avoiding authority. Recommendations: immediate placement in emergency youth shelter, medical evaluation, crisis counseling. Standard procedure. By the book. Exactly what she was trained to do. So why did it feel like she was setting a trap instead of offering help? Grace shook off the thought. She'd been doing this too long to second-guess herself now. The kid needed structure, needed safety, needed adults who could make sure he didn't die trying to be a hero for people who'd forget his name by next week. She hit send on the report, grabbed her jacket, headed for her car. By the time she pulled onto I-84, 2 patrol cars were already sweeping the underpass areas. The race had started. At 2:15, Bryn's phone buzzed with a message from Garrett. "Found him. I-84 bridge, eastbound side. He's in bad shape. We're holding position, but he won't let us get close." Bryn's heart slammed against her ribs. She showed the message to Saxon. "How far?" she signed. 15 minutes if we push it." "Push it." The truck accelerated. Bryn watched the city blur past, hands clenched tight around her phone, counting seconds. Behind them, 5 motorcycles kept pace, riding in formation, blocking lanes to clear a path. At 2:40, they saw the bridge. At 2:50, they saw the patrol cars. Bryn's stomach dropped. 2 police vehicles parked at angles near the bridge, support lights off, but engines running. Officers standing outside talking into radios, scanning the shadows under the overpass. Saxon pulled over 100 yards back, killed the engine. The bikes pulled up around them, forming a loose perimeter. "They're here for him," Saxon said. It wasn't a question. Bryn didn't answer. She was already opening the door, reaching for her crutches, trying to figure out how fast she could move on a broken leg, if speed was the difference between getting to him first or watching police take him away. Saxon caught her arm. "Wait, I can't." "Yes, you can." His voice was hard, not angry, controlled. "We go in there hot, we make this worse. Let me handle the cops. You focus on the kid." Bryn wanted to argue, but Saxon was already out of the truck, walking toward the patrol cars with his hands visible, posture relaxed, playing the concerned citizen instead of the biker everyone assumed he was. Bryn watched him go. Then she looked at Garrett, who'd appeared beside her window. "He's still under there," Garrett said quietly, "tucked way back in the shadows. They haven't seen him yet." "Can you get me closer without them noticing?" Garrett considered. "Maybe, if you're quiet." Bryn grabbed her crutches. Garrett helped her down from the truck, moving slow, keeping the vehicle between them and the police. They circled wide, using the bridge support as cover, Bryn's crutches sinking into soft dirt with each step. The pain in her leg was screaming now, but she pushed through it, focused on the shadows ahead, on the shape that might have been a person or might have been debris, but was absolutely, definitely him. They got within 20 feet before Jonah noticed them. His head snapped up. Even from this distance, Bryn could see the panic in his eyes, the way his body tensed like he was preparing to run, despite the fact that running would kill him. Garrett held up a hand. "Just her," he said. "No cops, I promise." Jonah's eyes shifted to Bryn. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or disbelief. Like he couldn't understand why the girl he'd carried would be standing here on crutches instead of safe in a hospital bed where she belonged. Bryn took another step. Her crutch slipped on loose gravel and she nearly went down. Caught herself. Kept moving. "Stop," Jonah said. His voice was wrecked. "You shouldn't be here." Bryn ignored him. She closed the distance between them, awkward and painful, until she was close enough to see his face clearly. Close enough to see how gray his skin had gone, how badly his hands were shaking. Close enough to see that he was dying. She dropped to the ground beside him, crutches clattering away, her casted legs stretched out in front of her. Jonah stared at her. "What are you doing?" Bryn pulled out her phone, typed fast. "You carried me. Now I'm not leaving you." Jonah read the screen, shook his head. You don't understand. If they find me, they'll put me in the system. I can't go back there. Then we don't let them find you. How? The word came out desperate, broken. They're already here. Bryn looked back toward the patrol cars. Saxon was still talking to the officers buying time, but it wouldn't last. Eventually, they'd expand their search. Eventually, they'd find Jonah huddled here with a girl who should have been in the hospital. She made a decision. My dad was you. Foster kid. System tried to break him. He knows what they'll do. She typed faster. Let me carry you now, please. Jonah stared at the screen for a long time. Bryn could see him fighting it, see every instinct screaming at him to run, to disappear, to protect himself the only way he knew how. Then his body betrayed him. Another violent tremor seized his muscles, and he collapsed sideways. Consciousness flickering like a candle in wind, Bryn grabbed him, or tried to. Her hands closed on his jacket, but she had no leverage, no strength, just desperation and a broken leg that made every movement agony. Garrett. Her voice came out loud, unmodulated. She didn't care. Help me. Garrett was there in seconds. He scooped Jonah up like he weighed nothing, blanket and all, and started moving back toward the trucks. The cops, Bryn started. Saxon's got them, Garrett said. Move. Bryn grabbed her crutches and followed, pain shooting through her leg with every step. Behind them, she heard voices rising, heard Saxon's voice cutting through with authority that demanded attention. They made it to the trucks. Garrett loaded Jonah into the back of Saxon's extended cab, Bryn climbing in after him. The crew's medic, a guy called Bishop, who'd been an Army corpsman before the Army decided they didn't want him anymore, was already there with a medical kit. He's hypothermic, Bishop said, wrapping Jonah in thermal blankets. Maybe 2 hours from serious organ damage. We need to warm him slow or his heart could stop. How slow? Bryn asked. Slower than we have if those cops decide to search vehicles. Saxon appeared at the driver's window. We're clear, for now. They're checking the west side, but we need to move. Where? Bryn said. Saxon met her eyes in the rearview mirror. Garage. It's the only place they won't look without a warrant. He started the engine. The convoy pulled out, moving fast, but not fast enough to draw attention, just 6 motorcycles and a truck heading east, like they had every right to be there. In the back seat, Jonah's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Bryn, confusion and fear, and something else warring across his face. Why? He whispered. Bryn took his swollen hand in hers, carefully, gently. She didn't type an answer. She just held on and hoped that would be enough. The garage sat at the end of an access road most people didn't know existed, tucked between a shuttered tire shop and a warehouse that stored equipment no one needed anymore. Saxon had bought the property 8 years ago for cash, no mortgage, no paper trail, the kind of place that didn't show up on official maps. They pulled Jonah inside at 3:47. The crew worked in silence, setting up a cot in the back room, hanging heat lamps, running warm water. Bishop started an IV hand steady, talking Jonah through each step. Just fluids, he said. Get your core temp up. You're going to be okay. Jonah didn't look like he believed it. Bryn sat beside the cot leg, propped on a toolbox, watching color slowly return to Jonah's face. It took 20 minutes before he stopped shaking. 30 before he could speak without his teeth chattering. They're going to find me, he said finally. Bryn typed on her phone. Not if we're smart about it. You don't understand how this works. They always find you. She hesitated, then typed something she'd been holding back since the moment Garrett's text came through. What's your name? Jonah closed his eyes. Why does it matter? Because I need to know who I'm fighting for. The room was quiet except for the hum of the heat lamps and the distant sound of engines being rebuilt in the main garage. Jonah opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked. Like he was trying to figure out if she was real or just another hallucination brought on by hypothermia and exhaustion. Jonah, he said finally. Jonah Reed. Bryn smiled. Typed. Nice to meet you, Jonah. I'm Bryn Ashford, and I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. Before Jonah could argue, footsteps echoed from the front of the garage. Heavy, official. Saxon appeared in the doorway, expression grim. We've got a problem, he said. Bryn's heart sank. Police, worse. Child services. 2 cars just pulled up outside. They're asking to come in. Jonah tried to sit up. Bishop pushed him back down gently but firmly. You're not running, Bishop said. Not in your condition. I can't let them take me. They won't. Bryn's voice came out louder than she intended. She grabbed her crutches, forced herself to stand despite the pain screaming through her leg. I won't let them. Saxon looked at her. What are you going to do? Bryn didn't have all the answers yet. She was 17 years old with a broken leg and no legal standing, and absolutely no idea how to stop a system designed to process kids like Jonah into facilities that would break them. But she knew one thing: she wasn't going to let them take him without a fight. I'm going to tell them the truth, she said. She moved toward the door. Saxon caught her arm. Once you open that door, he said quietly, this gets bigger than us. You understand that? Bryn nodded. I'm aware. You sure? She looked back at Jonah, at the boy who'd destroyed himself carrying her, who'd disappeared rather than accept thanks, who was lying on a cot in her father's garage because she'd refused to let him die alone. I'm sure, she said. Saxon let her go. Bryn walked to the front of the garage, crutches steady despite her shaking hands. Through the window, she could see 2 cars, 4 people, social workers probably, maybe police. She reached for the door handle. Behind her, Jonah called out weakly, Don't. Bryn looked back. I have to. Why? She smiled, sad, determined, absolutely certain. Because you didn't leave me when you could have. I won't leave you either. She opened the door. A woman stood on the other side. 35 professional closed, tired eyes. She held a badge up where Bryn could see it. Bryn Ashford, the woman said. Bryn nodded. I'm Grace Holloway, Multnomah County Child Services. We have reason to believe you're harboring an at-risk minor. I need you to let us inside. Bryn didn't move. She stood in the doorway, blocking entry, crutches, planted, broken leg, throbbing but holding steady. No, she said. Grace's expression didn't change. I'm not asking. Neither am I. Bryn pulled out her phone, opened the video, the one that now had 300,000 views and was still climbing. She held it up so Grace could see. That boy saved my life, Bryn said. And you want to repay him by locking him up. So no, you're not coming in. Not without a warrant. Grace looked at the phone, at Bryn, at the girl standing on one leg defending a stranger like her life depended on it. This isn't about punishment, Grace said carefully. It's about keeping him safe. Safe from what? From himself, from the streets, from people like you, Bryn interrupted. People who think helping means controlling. Grace's jaw tightened. You're 17. You don't fully understand how this works. I understand perfectly, Bryn said. You're here to take him away. I'm here to stop you. She didn't move, didn't back down, just stood there, a broken girl on crutches, daring the system to try. Grace stared at her for a long moment. Then she stepped back. We'll be in touch, she said. The cars pulled away. Bryn closed the door. Her leg gave out and she collapsed against the frame, breathing hard, vision swimming. Saxon caught her before she hit the ground. That was stupid, he said. Bryn laughed. It came out shaky, half hysterical. I realize that. They'll be back. I'm aware. Saxon helped her to a chair. Bryn sank into it, exhausted, pain crashing over her in waves now that the adrenaline was fading. From the back room, Jonah's voice drifted out. Quiet, disbelieving. She really did that. Bishop's reply was equally quiet. Yeah, she did. Silence fell over the garage. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Inside, a girl and a boy who barely knew each other sat in separate rooms, bound together by a choice made on a dark highway. Tomorrow would bring consequences, legal threats, system pressure, a fight neither of them was prepared for. But tonight, for now, Jonah was warm, and Bryn was standing, and neither of them was alone. And sometimes that was enough. Part 3, the stand. The knock came at 6:35, exactly as Saxon said it would. 3 sharp raps against metal, measured and professional, the sound of someone who knew what they were here for and wasn't interested in negotiation. Bryn had been sitting in the main garage for the past hour, crutches leaned against her chair, watching the door, like she could will it to stay closed through sheer force of attention. It didn't work. Saxon stood near the workbench, arms crossed, face unreadable. The crew had cleared out 20 minutes ago, bikes disappearing down side streets, taking different routes back to homes and apartments scattered across Portland. Plausible deniability. If this went bad, if Grace came back with warrants and police and the full weight of the system Saxon wanted, as few people caught in the blast radius as possible. Bishop remained sitting beside Jonah's cot in the back room, monitoring vitals, keeping watch. Jonah was awake now, coherent color returning to his face as warmth and fluids did their work. He tried to get up twice. Bishop had pushed him down both times with a kind of gentle firmness that suggested arguing would be pointless. The knock came again, louder this time. Bryn grabbed her crutches and stood. Pain shot through her leg, but she'd stopped caring about that hours ago. Pain was just information. Information she could use to remind herself why she was doing this. Saxon moved toward the door, but Bryn shook her head. "My fight," she said. Saxon hesitated, then stepped aside. Bryn crossed the garage floor, each step, deliberate crutches, striking concrete in a rhythm that sounded like drum beats. She reached the door and stopped, hand on the handle, taking one breath to center herself. Then she opened it. Grace Holloway stood on the other side, flanked by two police officers this time. Not the same ones from earlier. These looked harder, older, the kind who'd been doing this long enough to stop caring about individual stories and start seeing everything as categories to be processed. Grace's expression was carefully neutral. "Miss Ashford?" Bryn didn't move from the doorway. "You're back. I told you we would be." Grace pulled out a folder, held it up where Bryn could see. "I have a court order for a welfare check on the minor you're currently harboring. You can let us in voluntarily or we can come back with a warrant, your choice." Bryn looked at the paper, read the first few lines. Legal language dense and impenetrable, but the meaning was clear enough. They had permission to enter. They had permission to take Jonah. She looked up at Grace. "Why are you doing this?" Grace blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I'm doing my job." "Your job is to help kids." "That's what I'm trying to do." Bryn shook her head. "No, you're trying to control him. There's a difference." One of the officers shifted his weight hand, moving slightly closer to his belt. Not threatening, just ready. Bryn saw it and adjusted her stance, planting her crutches more firmly, making it clear she wasn't moving. "Miss Ashford," Grace said, voice hardening, "you're 17 years old. You don't have legal authority to make decisions about this minor's welfare." "Neither do you," Bryn replied. "Not until he tells you he wants your help. He's not in a position to make that determination. Because you've decided he's not." Bryn's voice rose, anger bleeding through the careful control she'd been maintaining. "He saved my life. He carried me 5 miles when his body was breaking. And you want to repay that by taking away the only thing he has left." "Which is what?" Grace asked. "The choice to say no." Silence fell. The officers looked at Grace, waiting for direction. Grace looked at Bryn, reevaluating, trying to figure out if this was teenage rebellion or something more complicated. Bryn didn't give her time to decide. She pulled out her phone, opened the video, held it up. 350,000 views, she said. "Local news wants an interview. National outlets are picking it up. People are asking questions. Why didn't anyone stop? Where is he now? What happens to heroes who don't fit into your boxes?" Grace's jaw tightened. Social media attention doesn't change the facts. "No," Bryn agreed, "but it changes who's watching." She lowered the phone, met Grace's eyes directly. "Come back tomorrow," she said. 2 o'clock, Community Center on Burnside. We'll talk, all of us, including him, in public, with witnesses." "That's not how this works." "It is now," Bryn said. "Because if you take him tonight, everyone watching this story will see exactly what the system does to people who help. Is that really the headline you want?" Grace stared at her for a long moment. Bryn could see the calculation happening behind her eyes as weighing options, measuring risks, trying to figure out which choice would create fewer problems down the line. Finally, Grace stepped back. "Tomorrow," she said. 2 o'clock. But this doesn't end there, Miss Ashford. One way or another, we're going to make sure that boy gets the help he needs." "Good," Bryn said. "So am I." The officers left first. Grace lingered for a moment, studying Bryn's face like she was trying to memorize it. "You're going to lose," she said quietly. "The system always wins." Bryn smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. "Not always," she said. "My dad's proof of that." Grace walked away. The cars pulled out taillights, disappearing into the evening traffic. Bryn closed the door and sagged against it, crutches clattering to the floor as her leg finally gave out. Saxon caught her, again. He was getting good at that. That bought us time, he said. Maybe 18 hours. What's your plan? Bryn looked toward the back room where Jonah was listening to everything, probably terrified, probably already planning his escape the moment Bishop's attention slipped. I'm going to tell the tree, she said. All of it, on camera, before they can control the narrative. Saxon nodded slowly. You realize what that means. Yeah. Bryn pulled herself upright, grabbing her crutches. It means I stop asking permission. She made the call at 7:15. The number belonged to a reporter from K2 News, who'd been leaving messages on her phone since noon, each one more desperate than the last. Bryn had ignored them all, waiting, letting the pressure build, making sure that when she finally responded, the reporter would say yes to anything. She answered on the first ring. This is Jessica Raines. This is Bryn Ashford, Bryn said. The girl from the video. I'll give you an exclusive interview. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., but only if you agree to my terms. She heard papers rustling, voices conferring in the background. What term? Live broadcast, no editing. I say what I need to say, you air it, all of it. More rustling. That's unusual. Those are the terms, Bryn repeated. Take it or I call someone else. Silence stretched for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Then Jessica's voice came back sharper, now energized. We'll take it, where Bryn gave her the address of the community center, hung up before Jessica could ask follow-up questions. Then she typed out a text to Saxon. It's done. Tomorrow morning everyone watches. Saxon replied immediately. You sure about this? Bryn looked at her phone for a long moment before typing her answer. No, but I'm doing it anyway. She walked back to the room where Jonah lay on the cot, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Bishop had stepped out to give them privacy. Smart man. Bryn sat down in the chair beside the cot. Jonah didn't look at her. You can't stop them, he said quietly. Watch me. You don't understand what they're like, what they'll do. Bryn pulled out her phone, showed him the post, the view count climbing past 400,000, now comments flooding in faster than she could read them. Tomorrow morning, I'm going on TV, she said. I'm going to tell everyone exactly what happened, who you are, what you did, and what they're trying to do to you now. Jonah's eyes finally shifted to her face. Why? Because you didn't leave me when you could have. I won't leave you either. That's different. How Jonah struggled to sit up. Bishop had warned him not to move too much, warned about blood pressure and core temperature, and a dozen other medical concerns Jonah clearly didn't care about. He got himself upright, legs dangling off the edge of the cot, and looked at Bryn with an intensity that made her chest ache. I carried you because no one else would, he said. There was no choice. You would have died. And you'll die if I don't fight for you, Bryn replied. Maybe not tonight, maybe not this week, but eventually. So where's the difference? Jonah opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. I don't want to be on TV, he said finally. You don't have to be. This is my interview, my story. You just have to show up tomorrow afternoon and tell them what you want. That's it. One decision, yes or no. And if I say no, Bryn met his eyes, then I'll still fight for you, but it'll be harder, and I might lose. Jonah stared at her for a long time. She let him look, let him see that she meant every word. That this wasn't charity or pity or some misguided attempt to play hero. This was a debt she intended to pay whether he wanted her to or not. Okay, he said finally, I'll be there. You'll speak, Jonah hesitated, then nodded once. I'll speak. Bryn felt something in her chest unclench. She reached out careful with his damaged hands and squeezed his wrist gently. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Jonah replied. Wait and see if I don't run. You won't. How do you know? Bryn smiled. Because you didn't leave me on that highway. You're not the running type. She stood, grabbed her crutches, and headed for the door. Behind her, Jonah called out, Bryn? She turned. What happens if we lose? Bryn considered the question. Thought about Grace and the court order and the system that ground people down into shapes it could manage. Thought about Saxon at 14, crawling down a roadside because no one stopped. Thought about all the ways the world taught people that asking for help meant giving up control. Then we lose, she said, but at least we'll lose honestly. She left him there to think about that. The interview aired at 9:03 the next morning. Bryn sat in a folding chair in the community center's main room, leg propped on another chair, crutches visible in the frame. She'd refused makeup, refused wardrobe assistance, refused everything except a quiet space to sit and a camera pointed at her face. Jessica Raines sat across from her, professional smile firmly in place, notes in hand. The camera operator counted down. 3, 2, 1, live. Good morning, I'm Jessica Raines, and this is a KTU News exclusive. With me is Bryn Ashford, the 17-year-old whose rescue 2 nights ago has captured the attention of the entire Pacific Northwest. Bryn, thank you for speaking with us. Bryn nodded. She'd practiced this last night, practiced staying calm, practiced keeping her voice level, even though she couldn't hear herself speak. Saxon had helped signing feedback telling her when she was getting too loud or too quiet. Tell us what happened that night, Jessica prompted. Bryn took a breath. Then she told the story. Not the sanitized version. Not the feel-good narrative that would make people comfortable. The real story. The crash. The pain. The cars that passed without stopping. 8 of them, she said. She'd counted. 8 separate chances for someone to help and 8 separate choices to keep driving. And then he appeared, Bryn said. This boy I'd never seen before. He told me he wouldn't leave me. And he didn't. She described the carrying, the 5.2 miles, the way she'd felt his body breaking down beneath her weight, heard his breathing turn ragged, felt his arms shaking so hard she thought he'd drop her. He fell once, she said, around mile 4. I screamed because my leg, the pain was... She paused, gathering herself. He was crying, apologizing, and then he stood back up and kept walking. Jessica leaned forward. That must have been terrifying. It was, Bryn agreed, but not because I thought he'd drop me, because I thought he was going to die trying not to. The camera stayed tight on her face. She could see the red light glowing, could imagine people across Portland stopping their morning routines to watch, and she used that. Used the attention, made sure every word landed exactly where it needed to. When we got to the gas station, I asked his name. Bryn continued. He wouldn't tell me. He just said I was safe, and that was all that mattered. Then he disappeared. Why do you think he left? Bryn looked directly at the camera, at Grace wherever she was watching, at everyone who thought they knew what this story meant. Because he's homeless, she said. Because he's 17 and has been on the streets for 2 years. Because he knows exactly what happens to kids like him when the system finds them. Jessica's professional smile faltered slightly. The system is designed to help. The system is designed to control, Bryn interrupted. And yesterday, Child Protective Services came to take him away. Not to thank him, not to help him, to lock him in a facility where he can't make his own choices anymore. That's exactly what's happening, Bryn said, voice rising. His name is Jonah Reed. He's 17 years old. He saved my life. And now the county wants to punish him for it by taking away the only freedom he has. She pulled out her phone, showed the video to the camera. The grainy footage of Jonah carrying her. The timestamp, the proof. This is what mercy looks like, she said. Someone destroying themselves for a stranger. And this is how we repay it, by hunting him down. By treating him like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected. Jessica tried to regain control of the interview. Miss Ashford, surely you understand that the county has a responsibility to what? Bryn demanded. To make sure he fits into their boxes, to process him through a system that's already failed him once. He doesn't need their help. He needs their respect. He needs them to listen when he says no. What do you want to happen? Bryn looked at the camera again, at Grace, at Jonah watching from somewhere in Saxon's garage, at everyone who'd ever driven past someone who needed help because stopping was inconvenient. I want people to show up, she said. 2 o'clock today, Community Center on Burnside. There's going to be a meeting. Child Services is going to try to take Jonah away. I'm asking Portland to witness it, to watch what happens when the system decides someone's freedom is less important than their paperwork. Jessica opened her mouth to ask another question, but Bryn was already standing, grabbing her crutches. That's all I have to say, she said. The feed cut to a bewildered Jessica trying to wrap up. Bryn didn't wait to see it. She was already moving toward the door where Saxon stood with his arms crossed and something like pride in his eyes. That was good, he signed in. That was reckless. Bryn signed back. Best kind. By noon, the video had been viewed 2 million times. By 1 o'clock, the community center parking lot was full. By 1:45, overflow crowds lined the street outside, people holding signs, chanting slogans, demanding answers. Some supported child services. Most didn't. The ones who didn't had signs with Jonah's name on them, with phrases like "respect heroes" and "freedom, not facilities." Grace arrived at 1:50 with a police escort. She looked exhausted. Bryn almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The meeting room was packed. Every chair filled, people standing along the walls, cameras set up in the back. Jessica Raines was there with her crew. So were reporters from the Oregonian, Willamette Week, and 3 Portland TV stations. This had stopped being a quiet administrative procedure the moment Bryn went on camera. Grace sat at the table in front, flanked by a legal advocate and the county's public affairs officer, a nervous-looking man who kept checking his phone like he was hoping for an emergency that would let him leave. Saxon sat in the back with his crew, not participating, just witnessing, the way he'd promised. Bryn sat in the front row, crutches propped beside her chair. The seat next to her was empty. She checked her phone. 1:58, no messages from Jonah, no confirmation that he was coming. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What if he ran? What if the pressure was too much? What if she'd pushed him into something he wasn't ready for and broken the fragile trust they'd built? 2 o'clock arrived. Grace called the meeting to order, started reading from prepared remarks about the county's responsibility, about duty of care, about protocols designed to protect vulnerable minors. The door opened. Jonah walked in. He looked terrible. Pale, still moving stiffly, hands wrapped in bandages that Bishop had insisted on. But he was upright. He was here. And when his eyes found Bryn's across the crowded room, something in his expression said he wasn't running. Not today. He made his way to the front row, ignoring the cameras tracking his movement, ignoring the whispers that followed him. He sat down in the empty chair beside Bryn without a word. Bryn reached over and squeezed his arm gently. He nodded once. Grace had stopped talking when Jonah entered. Now she cleared her throat and continued. As I was saying, we are here to discuss placement options for Mr. Reed that will ensure his safety and provide access to necessary services. No, Jonah said. The room went silent. Grace blinked. Excuse me? Jonah stood, slowly, like standing hurt, but he was doing it anyway. He looked at Grace, at the legal advocate, at the cameras, at the crowd of strangers who'd shown up because a girl on TV told them to care. I said no, he repeated, voice stronger this time. I don't want your placement. I don't want your services. I want it to be left alone. The legal advocate leaned forward. Mr. Reed, you're not in a position to make that determination. You're homeless. You have no visible means of support. I carried her 5 miles, Jonah interrupted. He pointed at Bryn, while adults drove past. While people who had houses and ways and all the things you think matter decided she wasn't worth stopping for. I stopped. I stayed. And now you want to punish me for it. This isn't punishment. Yes, it is, Jonah said. You want to put me somewhere I can't leave. Somewhere I have to ask permission to make my own choices. That's not help. That's a cane. Grace stood as well. We're trying to keep you safe. From what? Jonah's voice cracked. From being cold, from being hungry. I've been both for 2 years. I'm still here. I'm still alive. And I did something good. I saved someone. That should count for something. He turned to face the room, face the cameras, face everyone watching. My name is Jonah Michael Reed, he said. I'm 17 years old. I've been homeless since I was 15 because the last foster home I was in, he paused, swallowed. Doesn't matter. What matters is I'm asking for one thing. Let me choose. Bryn stood then, crutches scraping against the floor as she positioned herself beside Jonah. She pulled out her phone, typed quickly, held the screen up so Grace could see. He carried me because he could. I'm fighting for him because I can. That's agency. That's choice. Respect it. The room erupted. People shouting questions, cameras flashing, reporters trying to get statements. Grace raised her hands for quiet, but it took a full minute for the noise to die down. When it finally did, Grace looked at Jonah. Really looked. Not at a case file or a problem to be solved. At a person. What do you want? She asked quietly. Jonah glanced at Bryn. She nodded encouragement. I want to stay at the garage, he said. Saxon Ashford's offered me a place, not adoption, Not custody, just a room and work and the ability to leave if I decide to. I want voluntary check-ins with your office, not mandatory placement. And I want, he hesitated, I want someone to acknowledge that I did something good, that I'm not just a problem. Silence fell again, different this time, heavier. Grace looked at her legal advocate. They conferred in whispers. The public affairs officer was typing frantically on his phone, probably getting direction from supervisors who were watching this unfold on live television. Finally, Grace spoke. This is unconventional. Bryn stood taller on her crutches, signed as she spoke so Jonah could read her hands. So was carrying someone for miles when everyone else drove past. Grace's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. If we agree to this, she said, there are conditions, weekly check-ins, mandatory for the first month, medical evaluation, proof of housing and income. And if at any point we determine you're at risk, we reserve the right to intervene. Voluntary, Jonah said, not mandatory. Weekly check-ins are non-negotiable. Jonah looked at Saxon. Saxon nodded. Okay, Jonah said, weekly. The legal advocate pulled out a document, started writing, crossing out sections, adding clauses. It took 20 minutes to draft something that satisfied everyone. 20 minutes of lawyers and social workers, social worker and a teenage girl with a broken leg negotiating the terms of a boy's freedom. At 2:43, they had an agreement. Jonah would stay at Saxon's property in a separate living space. He would work at the garage, paid hourly with taxes documented. He would check in with child services every Wednesday at 3 p.m. for the next 30 days. After that, monthly until he turned 18. Most importantly, he could leave at any time. No locks, no mandatory therapy, no surrendering of autonomy in exchange for safety. Grace slid the document across the table. This is a one-time exception. We're doing this because the circumstances are extraordinary. And because, she looked at Bryn, because sometimes the system needs to be reminded that rules aren't the same as righteousness. Jonah picked up the pen with bandaged hands, signed his full name in careful letters at the bottom of the page. Bryn co-signed as witness. Saxon added his signature as sponsor. The cameras captured all of it. When it was done, when the meeting dissolved into reporters shouting questions and people wanting statements, and Grace escaping through a side door before anyone could corner her, Jonah sat very still in his chair, staring at the document like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Bryn sat down beside him, waited until he looked at her. You okay? She signed. Jonah nodded slowly. I think so. That was brave, what you said. That was terrifying. Same thing, Bryn signed with a small smile. They sat there for a moment while the chaos swirled around them. Two teenagers who'd met on the worst night of their lives and somehow found a way to make it matter. Finally, Jonah spoke. Thank you. Bryn shook her head. You carried me. I carried you back. We're even. I don't think that's how it works. Then we'll figure out a new way, Bryn said, together. Jonah smiled. It was small and uncertain and didn't quite reach his eyes yet, but it was there. 4 weeks later, Bryn met Jonah by the Columbia River on a Saturday morning that smelled like rain and possibility. Her cast was off, replaced by a walking boot that let her move without crutches. The doctors had warned her to take it easy, to not push too hard, to remember that broken bones took months to fully heal even after the hardware came out. She'd listened politely and then ignored every word. Jonah looked better, still too thin, still carrying shadows in his eyes that would probably never fully fade. But the color had returned to his face. The swelling in his hands had gone down. And when he walked, he didn't move like someone expecting to be chased. They stood at the railing overlooking the water, watching boats cut through the current. Bryn had suggested this meeting. Jonah had agreed without asking why. I'm thinking about leaving Portland, Jonah said after a while. Bryn's chest tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. Where would you go? I don't know. Somewhere I can choose to stay instead of having be swallowed. That makes sense, does it? Bryn nodded. You need to know the difference between staying because you want to and staying because you can't leave. Jonah looked at her. You get that. My dad taught me. He left Portland twice, came back both times, but only after he knew he could survive somewhere else if he wanted to. They were quiet for a moment. A gull landed on the railing, eyeing them for food, found nothing interesting, and flew away. Would you come back? Bryn asked. Maybe, Jonah said. Probably. I have a job now, a room, people who... He trailed off. Who care? Bryn finished. Yeah. She pulled something out of her jacket pocket. A keychain. Simple metal, no decoration with a single key attached. Saxon wanted me to give you this, she said. It's for the side entrance, so you can come and go without asking. Jonah took it carefully, turned it over in his hands like it might disappear if he looked away. This is real, he said, not a question, an affirmation. It's real. I carried you because I could, Jonah said quietly, not because I expected anything. I'm aware, Bryn replied, and I fought for you because I could, not because you owed me by D. So where does that leave us? Bryn smiled. Friends, if you want. Jonah considered that. I've never been good at friends. Neither have I, Bryn admitted. We can be bad at it together. He laughed, quiet surprise like the sound had escaped without permission. Okay. They stood there for a while longer, watching the river move, watching the city wake up around them. Eventually, Bryn spoke again. Will you come with me somewhere before you decide about leaving? Where? Highway 26, the crash site. I haven't been back since that night. Jonah tensed. Why go back? Because I need to see it in daylight, Bryn said. Need to see what it looks like when I'm not dying, and I'd like you there, if that's okay. Jonah didn't answer right away. Finally, he nodded. Okay. They drove out in Saxon's truck, Bryn behind the wheel, this time legs stiff but functional. The highway looked different in morning light. The trees weren't pressing close and threatening. The curves weren't sharp and dangerous. It was just a road. Bryn found the spot easily. The guardrail was still bent, waiting for a repair crew that would probably arrive sometime in the next fiscal year. She pulled over and they both got out. The ditch where her car had landed was empty now. Someone had towed the wreck days ago. All that remained was disturbed earth and some broken glass that caught the light. Bryn walked to the edge. Jonah stood beside her. I was so scared, she said softly. I thought I was going to die there. I'm aware. And then you appeared, like magic, like the universe decided I was worth one more chance. It wasn't magic, Jonah said. I was just walking. But you stopped. Yeah. Why? Bryn turned to face him. Why did you stop when no one else would? Jonah looked at the road, at the spot where he must have first seen her, at the distance he'd carried her mile by impossible mile. Because I've been the person left on the side of the road, he said finally. And I understand what it feels like when everyone decides you're not their problem. I couldn't be that person, the one who drives past. Bryn felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. You taught me something that night, she said. What? That mercy has weight, that choosing to help costs something real, and that it's worth it anyway. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched the bent guardrail, fingers tracing the torn metal. You taught me something too, he said. What? That being seen isn't the same as being owned, that someone can fight for you without taking you over. He looked at her. I've never had that before. Bryn stepped closer, not touching, just present. Two people standing at the site of their worst night, finding a way to turn it into something that didn't just hurt. If you leave, she said, and you need to come back, or if you need someone to know where you are, or if you just need someone to remember that you matter. I'm here. I'm aware, Jonah said. Same. They stood there for a few more minutes. Then Bryn turned back toward the truck. Come on, she said. Let's go home. They drove back together, windows down, morning air cutting through the cab. Bryn turned on the radio and found a station playing something old and familiar. Jonah didn't talk much, but his shoulders had lost some of their tension. When they pulled into the garage, Saxon was there working on an engine with Bishop. He looked up when they parked, signed a question at Bryn. Good, she nodded. Good. Saxon went back to his work, not hovering, not demanding explanations, just there if needed. Bryn and Jonah walked to the back room that Saxon had converted into living space. Small but private. A bed, a desk, a window that looked out on the street. Jonah's few possessions were arranged carefully on the desk. A couple of books he'd picked up from the library, the keychain Bryn had given him, a photo he'd found somewhere of the Columbia River. He sat on the bed. Bryn leaned against the doorframe. You really okay with me leaving if I need to? Jonah asked. Yeah, Bryn said. Because you'll come back when you're ready. And if you don't, that's okay too. Either way, you get to choose. Jonah nodded slowly. I'm not used to that. I understand, but you will be. She pushed off the doorframe. I'm going to physical therapy. You working today? Yeah. Saxon's teaching me how to rebuild carburetors. Sexy, Jonah smiled. Extremely. Bryn turned to leave, then stopped. Hey, Jonah. Yeah, I'm glad you stopped that night. His expression softened. Me too. She left him there, grabbing her keys, heading out to face the ordinary work of healing. Behind her, the garage hummed with activity, engines being torn down and built back up, metal shaped into new forms, things broken being made whole. That night, Bryn posted one final update to the video that had started everything. Update: Jonah is safe. He has housing work and autonomy. Thank you to everyone who showed up, who witnessed, who refused to let the system erase him. This is what community looks like. This is what it means to stop. She attached a photo, her and Jonah standing by the river, both smiling, both free. The post got 1 million views in 12 hours. But more importantly, it got seen by kids in other cities, in other situations, who were learning that being helped didn't have to mean being controlled. That there were people who would fight for your right to choose, even when the system said you weren't ready. That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stop and stay and carry someone until they could walk again. 3 months later, on a cold morning in January, Jonah came downstairs with his backpack packed and found Saxon drinking coffee in the garage office. I'm thinking about heading to Seattle for a few weeks, Jonah said. There's a job opportunity. Mechanic shop looking for apprentices. Saxon nodded. Good opportunity. Maybe. Want to check it out. You need anything gas money? Jonah shook his head. I've got it. Been saving. Saxon studied him for a moment, then held out his hand. Jonah shook it. Doors open, Saxon said. Whenever. I'm aware. Jonah headed for his bike, used but functional, bought with money from his first paycheck. He threw his leg over, started the engine, let it warm up. Bryn appeared from the house, limping slightly, but moving without the boot now. She walked over, signed a question. Seattle, Jonah nodded. Few weeks. Call when you get there. Yeah. She handed him something, a small emergency medical kit. Just in case, he smiled. Thanks. And Jonah? Yeah. Come back when you're ready, not before. He looked at her, at this girl who'd refused to let him disappear, who'd fought the system for his right to choose, who'd taught him that being seen didn't have to mean being trapped. I will, he said. Promise. He pulled out of the garage and onto the street. Bryn watched him go, hand raised in farewell, until he turned the corner and disappeared from view. Saxon came to stand beside her. He'll be back, he signed. Bryn nodded. I'm aware. How do you know? She smiled. Because we taught him he has somewhere worth coming back to. The sun broke through the clouds, painting the street in gold. Somewhere in the city, life continued. People helped or didn't help, stopped or drove past, made choices that mattered or pretended they didn't. But here in this garage, two people who'd been broken by the world had found a way to piece each other back together. Not through rescue, not through control, through witness, through choice, through the simple revolutionary act of refusing to let someone disappear just because it would be easier to look away. Bryn turned toward the house, then paused. She looked down at her leg where the surgical scar ran pink and raised beneath her jeans. She pressed her palm against it through the fabric, feeling the ridge of healed tissue, the proof that bones could break and still grow back stronger. The keychain in her pocket caught the light, a twin to the one she'd given Jonah. Saxon had made two, one for leaving, one for coming home. She pulled it out, turned it over in her hand. The metal was warm from her body heat, solid and real, and hers to keep or give away. That choice, she thought, was what mattered most, not the destination, not even the journey, just the knowledge that when you reached the fork in the road, you got to decide which path to take. And if you chose wrong, you could always turn around. The garage door rolled shut behind her with a sound like thunder, like finality, like the end of one story and the beginning of another. Inside, Saxon turned up the radio, an old song about roads and choices and the miles that stretched between who you were and who you could become. Bryn smiled. She knew all the words.